Wow, thank you, Brother Luigi. That is a great song, but even a greater truth, and I appreciate him doing that. It's not an easy one for him to sing, and it's just the way it's laid out, but I'm thankful that he did it. I asked him to do it sometime back. I appreciate that, and it's probably just right on time, him bringing the message of the song as well. And, there has been, even in the news, people talking about throwing out, if God is there and able, then why hasn't He stepped in and interfered with the storm? And here's one answer we know for sure, and that is we don't know what God's up to all the time. There's no way we could comprehend what He's up to. His ways are not ours. His thoughts are not ours. They're so far above ours, which I'm thankful for. And don't know what He's doing, but I know this: He can do anything He wants to do. And whatever He's doing, He has the best interest, our best interest in mind. And now the Lord has no pleasure in iniquity. And I do believe, as I preached, I think it was the 4th of July time frame, I do believe America is under the judgment of God. I believe we entered into that realm personally when we said it was okay to legally murder unborn babies. And all you have to do is read the heartbeat of Jesus, and you'll find time and again His opinion about those that are defenseless and helpless. And I believe we've entered into that. Now, God still is in the business of saving sinners. And the business of the gospel, it still works. And there's no reason for us to back up or pack up or slack up until He's taken us up, and that ain't happened yet. And I think that there is a great motivation to keep believing God today, as long as this book has not expired, and it's just as relevant today as it ever has been, and it always will be, so we're going to stick with it. Spurgeon said, "Preach the word or go home." And so we're going to preach the word and then go home, or wherever you plan to go. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 is where we'll be in our continuation of this study on Christianity 101. I think this will be the 10th message in this series or thereabout. And I know many have loved ones that are affected by the hurricane, and maybe there are some even here as a result of that. And I wonder if there's anybody here this morning who's here because you've had to evacuate and you're here in the service this morning. Is there anybody here such as that? We've got several that are here. And we hope to be a blessing to you, and anything we can do to minister to you and to be a help and encouragement, please let us know. How many have loved ones that are affected by either in the Florida hurricane or the Texas one? Would you raise your hand? So many. Yeah, so many. And I still think it was a great reminder to hear. Even when Jesus was 4 days late, He was right on time. And, don't doubt Him now. There's no need to do that. 1 Thessalonians chapter number 4. Let's stand together, please, and we do this to show our respect to the Word of God. We'll begin our reading in verse number 9 this morning, and we'll go from verse 9 to verse number 12. And if you received a bulletin, there would be a handout there. And I don't think we have the slides this morning, so follow along. I will try to. I don't even have the handout in front of me, but I've got the notes. You've got one page handout, and I've got 20 pages of notes, and so somewhere in my 20 pages it should be the answer to your blanks there. Verse number 9. But as touching brotherly love, ye need not that I write unto you, for ye yourselves are taught of God to love one another. And indeed ye do it toward all the brethren which are in all Macedonia. But we beseech you, brethren, that ye increase more and more, and that ye study to be quiet, and to do your own business, and to work with your own hands, as we commanded you, that ye may walk honestly toward them that are without, and that ye may have lack of nothing. Thank you. Please be seated. We've already prayed and have asked God's blessing upon the reading and the preaching of the Word of God. We've seen already how Paul has exhorted the church here to walk in a way in which to please God. We saw that in the last couple of messages. This walk, as Paul is pointing out, remember, these are fairly new believers. They've not been saved very long. And so he gives them an awful lot of doctrine and good teaching, but he's trying to ground them. And he gave them, as we looked at in the earlier portion of chapter 4, this matter. Remember, we talked about walking to please God. We talked about sanctification, that word that is found there. Well, he's talking about their walk now, meaning their way of living is completely different now that they are saved. It's completely different from before they were saved. And so he's going through and he's laying it out. And that should be the case still today. Even if you were saved as a young person, maybe you grew up in a Christian home and you only knew of a certain way to live, and that was what the Bible taught and going to church. But the fact of the matter is, when we got saved and because we're saved, our lifestyle, our living, and our walk should be drastically different than those who don't know God. And unfortunately, that's not the case. But that's what Paul is talking to them about. And he talked about in the first few verses of chapter 4, verses 1 through 8, he talked about how their walk should be different in fleeing from fornication, in their morality, being moral, being pure in their morality. He talked about it should result in holy living, holiness. Holy living means being set apart. And he said it should be a set apart life. People should look and they should see you and recognize you're set apart for something. You know, I'm out in places and people will ask, are you a preacher? And I will say yes. And I give up asking how they know it, but a lot of times they will say, well, you just kind of act like it. Well, that's good. But I know that that's a foreign concept because there's an awful lot of preachers today that look like they're coming off of a Hollywood studio set. There's a lot of those who are preachers who look like they are part of some grunge band. You know, it's just somehow entertainment and Christianity has seemed to link up. You've got politicians, you've got Fortune 500 businessmen who wear suits and have this neat appearance, but somehow the world, a rock concert, you wouldn't expect the performer to come out in a rock concert dressed like me. You wouldn't expect at a rap concert someone to be dressed like me. But you would expect many times a politician to be dressed like me. I was in the airport, Atlanta airport, and one who was looking at my ticket when I stepped up to the security line, they said, you're either a politician or you're a minister. And I said, I'm honest, I'm a minister. And so, but they said, I can just tell by the way you're dressed, or one of the two. But today, it's almost like the rock crowd, the rap crowd, the Hollywood crowd, and the church leaders look more alike. It's almost the politician puts the tie on, the businessman leading the CEO corporate group puts the tie on, and I'm not talking about what you wear in the pew, I'm talking about the leadership, and I'm saying that today the church is trying to give the idea, well, we want to look like those that don't really know the Lord. I think I've mentioned before, when I traveled, I was at the mercy of whatever town we were in to get my hair cut. I never got my hair cut by the same person in 1 year more than once, just because it's in a different place. And I always looked for that red and white barber pole, you know, and just barbershop pole. I wanted an old-fashioned. My grandfather took me to get my hair cut when I was 5 years old, and he set me down in a chair, and he says, I want you to give my grandson an old-fashioned, all-American, apple pie boy haircut. And I thought that's the way I was always supposed to ask for it. So I just would say, I'm looking for an old-fashioned, all-American, apple pie boy haircut. And but I remember going to one place, my least favorite place in all the world to go to is a beautician. I just didn't care to go to a beautician. And someone asked me why. I said, well, when Samson put his head in the hands of, it just didn't go well. But there were times where my wife had to get her hair done, and I'm pressed for time. I got to get it done, and I said, I'll try it out. But you go in first. You tell me if the coast is clear. And I'm not so worried about anymore, especially going with my wife. I wasn't worried about some woman running her hands through my head as much as some man running his hands through my head. And so I said, you check it out and you come back and you let me know. I remember she came back one time and she said, well, he's got a wedding band on. I said, that doesn't really help me a whole lot anymore. If you haven't figured out, I'm not about being politically correct. I'm trying to be scripturally accurate, and there is a problem with that. But I sat down in this chair, and this guy said, what do you do? I said, I'm a preacher. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I just want you to cut it. It's just like it is. I want it short. I want the part. I don't care how out of date and out of fashion it may be. That's how it's going to be. I just want you to cut it off my ears, way off my ears, way off my collar. Can you do that? He said, you ought to let me do something different with your hair. I'm thinking, we're going to do something different here in just a moment. I just want you to get it off my ears and get it off my neck. He said, the drummer at my church, I do his hair, and he said, really what we do is I just run my hands through it and I just bring it up like that. We just poosh. I said, well, sir, I'm not the drummer at your church. I said, I just want you to just get it off my ears and get it off my neck. And here's what he said. You just want a Baptist preacher's haircut, don't you? I said, that's exactly right. Another reason to stick with the label. Hey, it's not bad having labels. And you try grocery shopping without labels. It's going to be quite difficult. What I'm saying is, there's nothing wrong with being holy. Paul is telling them to be separate and distinct. And it includes being free of fornication. He said to them these earlier verses, this new walk, it should cause you to abound more and more. And it should result in you pleasing God. Who are you trying to please? I remember after a service one time I preached on, be not conformed to this world. Romans chapter 12. God said it. I remember a young person came up to me as a teenager, and he had two teenage friends right behind him. But he looked at me and said, preacher, no one tells me what to do. He said, I do my own thing. My preacher doesn't tell me what to do. My parents don't tell me what to do. I do my own. I wear what I want to wear. I dress the way I want to dress. I go where I want to go. No one tells me what to do. I laughed. I said, give me a break. You look just like the other two standing right behind you. Both of you have earrings everywhere but your ears. And both of you, all three of you, have the same different colors in your hair. And both of you are wearing the same kind of clothes. Don't tell me no one's telling you what to do. Somebody's always telling us what to do, and we're always listening to somebody. Remember, Jesus said we ought to pray this way. Let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Why? Let me ask you this. It's not a trick question. Do you think today God's will be accomplished in heaven? Yeah, every day, all the time. But do you think that God's will is always being accomplished here on earth? No. Sin is not the will of God. People defying authority is not the will of God. People rejecting Jesus is not the will of God. So why did he say, pray that God's will be done here upon earth as it is in heaven? Because God's will is not being done everywhere. And the point being is that there are only two wills, only two, God's will and Satan's will. And you and I are either following the will of God or the will of Satan. And the fact is, some of you have experienced when you've tried and you've set out, we're talking more than just coming to church, but when you've set out to truly seek God and follow the will of God, you have found there's been some opposition. You have found that you've had more problems than you had when you were not seeking God. To which the devil understands that, and he's trying to get you to see what's the use in serving God. The point is this: if you're not battling Satan, that's because you're fighting with Satan. But if you're on God's side and God's going to be on your side, you're going to find the one who is against God's going to be against you. You say, why would I sign up for that? Because greater is He that is in us than he that is in the world. So Paul is simply talking to them about this new way of living. And he says to them in verse 3, this new way of living, being free of fornication, being morally clean, pure, single-minded in your heart, soul, and mind, separated unto God, holy living, this abounding more and more in pleasing God. Verse 3, he says, it's the will of God. There's a lot of things I don't know that would be God's will for you. It differs in some ways. Where God would have you to work, where God would have you to live, those types of things. But this we do know, the will of God is that you would be separated unto God, you please God, you abound more and more, you be morally clean and pure, and that you ultimately walk with God. That's the will of God for your life. Amen. But now Paul has something else to say to them. He's admonishing these new Christians to walk with a different kind of a love for the brethren. Again, this is new to these people in Thessalonica. This is the town in which they're in, Thessalonica, and this is new. And so Paul's getting across to them this matter, walking with a new love. Let me title the message this way. Paul's trying to get them to see this, and this would be for us today. It's still about others. Amen. Here we are in September. Here we have the 3 signs in the bulletin which reflects the one word, others. 2,000 years after Paul has written this, it's still about others. And I hope we can see it this morning. The theme in this passage of Scripture is abounding in different areas. And here he's moving into this new kind of love, and he wants them to abound in this matter of loving others. That's the 3rd time Paul has emphasized abounding. Chapter 3 and verse 12, chapter 4 and verse 1, and then chapter 4 and verse 10. And Paul is pleading with these believers to grow in their love for each other. Just as Paul did that with the Thessalonians, I feel like I too am coming alongside you this morning, and I'm trying to provoke you to love and to good works. I too desire that people would be saved, but more importantly than just being saved is knowing the will of God for your life as a result of being saved, and that is so that you would abound more and more in your walk with God. Simply put, the life of a new believer, it is to be one of continual growth. What do we expect for everyone who gets saved? The same thing we expect for everyone who's been saved a long time, and that is that there's still continual growth and development, much like a physical baby who eventually would mature into adulthood. What is that baby who's grown up to be an adult? One of God's plan in creation is this matter of procreation, is the reproducing of themselves, and the same is true in our love for one another. But how is brotherly love? How is it different? How is it differentiated from common love that the world has? You see experiences like what we're going through in our country, the hurricane, and people helping out. And you'll find these good stories of good Samaritans who will really help and reach out. But how is brotherly love really different than just the common love experience in the world? Well, number one, brotherly love is to be manifested by a growing, thriving love for the brethren. A brotherly love that Paul is talking about is to be demonstrated or manifested by a growing, thriving love for the brethren. Notice in verse number 10, he says in the second half, "But we beseech you, brethren, that ye," notice the word, "increase." And then notice the superlatives, "more and more." So there is to be this manifestation of a growing, of a thriving love for the brethren. See, when it comes to the Christian life, the bottom line, the important line on this profit loss statement in a business world, the bottom line of this balance sheet in the Christian life is this: love. Love. Remember what he was talking about in the first few verses? We spent 2 messages on it, 2.5 almost, talking about the lust that is in man. Now he's talking about the love that is really from God. He's contrasting love and lust. Lust has no part in the Christian life, but love is everything in the Christian life. And so he's giving us a measuring stick. How can you tell how you're doing in your Christian walk? Well, the answer would be, according to Paul's writings, our love for others. That's how we're doing in our walk with God, others. See, love is expressed in deed, in action. James 2, verse 14 through 16, not just in words. We can say, love you. Just like we say, praying for you, and we may not necessarily be. James says, true faith, true love is demonstrated through action. See, love reaches out to the weak. Love reaches out to the friendless. Love reaches out to the unfortunate. Love reaches out to those who are ill or in need. Love delights in hospitality, according to Hebrews chapter 13. And it is, according to the Bible, the evidence of a genuine faith. See, Paul is saying, no one had to teach these Thessalonians to love each other. Paul says, I'm not writing to you. Notice again in verse number 9, but as touching brotherly love, ye need not that I write unto you. He says, I'm not writing on you to tell you to love each other. He says in verse 9, for ye yourselves are taught of God to love one another. So he says, I'm not writing this to tell you to do it, but what I am doing, Paul is saying, is I'm challenging you to abound in your love for one another. Why did Paul find it necessary to challenge them to love the brethren? Well, because God Himself had taught them to love. And if it's a big deal to God, according to verse 9, it ought to be a big deal to us. So Paul is saying, I didn't need to write to you to tell you to love, but I am urging you to do this even more and even more deliberate and on purpose. The evidence that they learned this lesson of brotherly love was their deep, selfless, giving affection for Christians in other parts of their province. It's the province of Macedonia. And so Macedonia, here is Thessalonica, where these people are. The church of Thessalonians is here. Thessalonica, the letter of Thessalonians is written to them. They're in Macedonia. Well, beside their town, like we would be here in Covington, beside them would be a few other neighbors such as Philippi and Berea. And these would be like Conyers and McDonough to us. And he's saying, love them too. Demonstrate your love. See, the love they were to exercise to the brethren, it's foundational in the teaching of Jesus Christ. Jesus said that love, brotherly love, is the badge of Christianity in John 13, verse number 35. Remember, Jesus said, a new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. Can you see again why this is a measuring stick as to how we're walking with God and how we're doing in our Christianity? True love for others is the antithesis of what abounded in the culture of this day. It wasn't normal for them to love and to be selfless and to be sacrificial. And by the way, it's not the norm today in our society either. I don't like I don't like salesmen. I have a hard time with salesmen because I am prone to want to take somebody at their word. And what I don't like is thinking that what I think is oftentimes a reality, and that is whatever the salesman is saying to me is not really for my benefit, but it's more for his. Listen, we have a lot of things that take place today, and a lot of people doing things where they have an angle, where they have an agenda. We have no angle. We should have no agenda. I'm not doing for you so that you will do for me. Jesus didn't do for us so that we would do for Him. We are trying to really understand here what Paul is saying, and that is true, genuine, brotherly love is something that is supernatural, and this is a tremendous gauge as to my walk with the supernatural one, because it's not natural. This is my commandment, John 15:12. Jesus said this is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. See, love is the very expression of God's character. So Paul carefully uses here the word. I keep saying brotherly love because this is the word that Paul uses. Notice again in verse 9, but it's touching brotherly love. To underline the kind of love that believers are to demonstrate to each other, he refers to it as a brotherly love. It's the love that impels you to deny yourselves for the benefit of the one whom you love. William Penn, the Quaker founder of the city of Philadelphia, he established this city in hopes that there'd be a sanctuary, a place where people could live, where they're genuinely loving each other, not tolerating crime or anything illegal, but one where they demonstrate love for one another. Brotherly love, the city of brotherly love. But you look at their crime statistics and you think somebody needs to tell them that they're supposed to be the city of brotherly love. But this is the emphasis. Paul desired that their love would be ever excelling and super abounding. So in verse 10, he's basically saying this, I beg of you. That's the urgency. He says, I'm begging of you. Please, brethren, that you see to it that you continually are increasing more and more in this love. That's the emphasis. That's what he's saying in verse 10. Why? Well, Paul knew that sinful man's inclination for brotherly love is to get colder rather than get hotter. You know, once the hurricane passes, once the storm's gone, once everything goes back and football becomes the main thing, it goes back to me, self. So Paul is saying to them, now's not the time to let ever this waning of your love settle in. It can't. You're going to have to, on purpose, determine, I'm going to be fervent in my love one for another. Here's another passage. You don't have to turn there. But Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. The Bible says, and let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as ye see the day approaching. You know, one of the things there that's emphasized in that passage, and probably what we say when you hear somebody talk about not forsaking the assembling of yourself together, I hope you get this at least out of it, because this is a fact. And that is, skipping church is serious. And that's what he's going after. It's serious. It's a serious deal. If it's serious to the Savior, it ought to be a serious matter to us. Don't skip church. But I think it's shocking that this passage is focusing on the warning to us that we skip church. The focus is not that we put ourselves at risk. Rather, according to verse 24 of that verse, of that passage, it warns us that when we skip church, we put other people at risk. So that's why the writer of Hebrews is saying, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. Why? Because of the purpose of going to church. The first sin of skipping church is the sin of failing to love others. That's why, again, this is a good measuring stick as to your walk with God. Everybody who says, well, this part of the day is God's day, and this evening is going to be my time. You don't understand. This part of the day, if it's God's time, then it's about others. And so God says we want to do it again tonight. We're going to do it again on Wednesday. The first sin of skipping church is the sin of failing to love others. See, gathering with God's people is not first about being blessed. Never. Well, I hope I get blessed today. That's not the first thought that should come to your mind. Even with, I'm talking about good people. I'm looking for a blessing. Well, good. But that shouldn't be the first thought. The first thought should be, how can I be a blessing? Can I say again, do you see as to why this is a good measuring stick as to my walk with God? It's not first about getting, but it's first about giving. As you prepared to worship this morning, was your first consideration, how can I stir up somebody else to love God? See, we should approach Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night deliberately. We should approach eagerly to do good to others and to be a blessing to them. That's really why I did that fuzz run yesterday. It was more fuzz, crawl, walk, and a little bit of run at the end. I did run when I crossed the finish line just to make it look good. But I didn't do it for my... Now, I know people do it for all kinds of reasons. People do things because of they've got goals in mind. Some guy passed me carrying a big old chunk of wood on his back with one hand. I mean, he had a backpack on, carrying this huge piece of wood. And I'm thinking, wherever he found it, I'm sure that they've got one like it at the finish line where he didn't have to carry that the whole 5K. But people have all kinds of reasons for doing it. And there's nothing wrong with it. I've got a goal. I want to run. I've got a Pastor Hardy who will be here this weekend for our men's summit. He's been in 2 marathons. He's run 2. I think he's probably working on his 3rd one here pretty soon when he's able to. Well, I know he is, because when he was here for the revival meeting, he was training for it, running around here. But people have all kinds of goals. But honestly, my reason is nothing spiritual. It's just I wasn't doing it for physical reasons. I didn't have a physical goal. My physical goal was just to still be breathing at the end. That was my physical goal. But I did it for the purpose of showing to the law enforcement, to the community, we do care, along with the several thousand that were there doing it. And I did it to be an encouragement to, my wife wanted to do it. We had Andrea and Luigi part of it. We all did it together. And I wanted to be of an encouragement. Let's do this together. In other words, coming to church ought to be that same thing. I don't know if I'm going to get anything out of it today. Well, you may not. But I'm going to tell you, God has something to give you, and you should never leave empty-handed or empty bucket, but you should come ultimately to say, even if I don't get something, I should be here to give somebody something, and that is my love and my encouragement, and how can I help them? Anybody who's gone through discipleship but is not able to turn around and take those same lessons and demonstrate with somebody else, here's how you ought to be walking with God. You didn't go through discipleship. You went through a book, but you didn't go through discipleship. And that is why there's a breakdown in your loving others. Because there's a breakdown in your walk with God. Can you see again why this is a good measuring stick as to our walk with God? So when you feel the temptation to skip out on a service or withdraw altogether because we got stuff going on in my life. Who doesn't have stuff going on in their life? You need to consider why this is serious to God, and you ought to consider your God-given responsibility to encourage one another, and all the more, he says, as you see the day approaching. What does that mean? That means God says you ought to be in this matter of not skipping church because of this matter of encouraging others through loving them, because Jesus is coming. Well, that was 2,000 years ago. If it was serious then, it ought to be a whole lot more, 2,000 times more serious today. Because His day is still approaching. So bottom line, Hebrews 10, 24, 25, when we say, be faithful to church, it's not about us. It's because of others. It's because of others. I'm not here for me. If I were here for me, there would be some things we do different. I'm not here. God didn't call me to preach and to serve for me. He called me to preach and to serve for others. See, as men learn more and more about each other, the tendency, however, is to find it more difficult to love. Offenses will happen. You're going to get wounded. Failures take place. Mistakes happen. Paul says all the more reason to increase in your love for one for another. It's recognizing people. This is not spiritual here, but just give you a practical way of looking at people. You're familiar, many of you perhaps, with Dale Carnegie, and some of you, if you've been in a business, social aspect of business, people relations, you may have gone through, have been challenged with the tips from Dale Carnegie. I remember years ago reading of these 5 tips from Dale Carnegie regarding people. He said, number 1, become genuinely interested in other people. I like the phrase genuinely interested rather than acting like it. How many of you have ever done a timeshare presentation? Raise your hand. Ever done one of those? Boy, I love the way it starts out. man, we really want to make you happy. We want to do all these different things. And we did them several times. It was easy for us. We had a rule. The rule was I didn't talk. And because if I talked, I'd be signing up every time. Because I just take them at their word. Hey, this is a great deal. This is the best deal in the world? All right, then let's sign up for it. So my wife says, here's the deal. We go, but you don't talk. So I just shake my head. They always look at me because I'm the man, and so they're looking at me. Yeah, But she's the one. And how did I know what to do? Well, it was by how many kicks I got in my shin. That's how I knew underneath the table. Good, bad, and so if I was ever falling for it, and she knew, I got a hard kick, and all of a sudden I got just a scowl on my face because I'm in pain is what it is. But after a while, no, we're not interested. Well, then it went from, I thought we were going to be vacationing together with this salesman, the way he was making it sound, to where we don't have anything to do with each other anymore. He wasn't genuinely interested. He had an interest, but it wasn't in us. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. The second thing Carnegie said was smile. You want to draw others to you, light up your face with a smile. I wish we could. I just wish we could do it from time to time. And that is put a video camera up here and might as well tick others off and put one up here and just pan the crowd and let you see what I see. Blessed assurance, and you couldn't look more disgusted, some of you. Jesus is mine, and it looks like you're about to have a gallbladder attack. And it's no wonder that some people just wonder, what do you care about? Remember names, number 3. A person's name is the sweetest and most important sound to that person. Even if it's not true, even if Dale Carnegie believed it, I think it's worth noting. I remember saying to Jim Van Gelder, an evangelist we had here, he said, when you go into the Christian school, we would do Christian school revival meetings and church in the evening, Christian school during the day, the churches that had schools. They'd have 150, 200 in the high school. And he said, by the end of the week, you need to know every one of those kids' names. And I remember saying to him, I said, I'm just not good with names. To which he said, Bill, that's a spiritual problem. I said, what do you mean? He said, does God know their names? I said, well, sure. He said to me, then do you believe you can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth you? I said, well, actually not, I don't guess. But I said, yeah, I do. He said, it's a spiritual issue. And I began to recognize this is a spiritual matter. And I need to ask God to help me. And especially if it is the sweetest and most important sound to that person. My wife's noted people who have, and she's only met one time, but yet people who would say her name whenever she'd meet them again a couple years later. She said, that just meant the world. So Carnegie had something there. Number 4, he said, be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. I've had people say to me, how are you doing, preacher? And I go to answer after taking my breath, and they go to start telling me everything that they're going through. I thought, well, I'll tell you after you're done. Talk in terms of other person's interest. Treat others the way they want to be treated. What is it? It's just others. Number 2, quickly here, brotherly love is to be manifested by a willingness to labor faithfully. And we're going to look at this tonight because of a certain particular application this has to us. And brotherly love is to be manifested by willingness to labor faithfully. Notice what he says in verse 11. And that ye study to be quiet and to do your own business and to work with your own hands as we commanded you. See, when we truly love the brethren, he says, our love for them will be characterized by 2 basic things. 1, there's going to be a study. Study. But this word study doesn't mean open up a book and sign up for school. It means rather strive with a vigorous effort, ambition. He says rather than become idle or dependent, you need to have this both physical and spiritual ambition about you. Study, have an ambition, be diligent, a vigorous effort about what? About being quiet. What is that? It doesn't mean silence as opposed to speaking. It means restfulness. Paul was telling the Thessalonians to be less frantic. Be undisturbed. Be settled in your soul. So it's almost this oxymoron. It's almost this contradiction of terms. Be ambitious about not having ambition. Be diligent in this matter of being settled. So what Paul is saying is, study to be quiet. Do your own business. Work with your own hands. Make it your ambition to have no ambition. Make it your ambition to stay out of the limelight. And then he tells them to work with your own hands, as we commanded you. In other words, there needs to be a laboring both physically and spiritually for the glory of God. And he talks about how it produces peace rather than discord, strife and confusion. You know how much strife and contention would be erased from any church if the membership would practice this matter of staying out of other people's business. And if we would be involved in both physical and spiritual labor until Jesus comes. See, the gospel of Jesus never encourages people to be idle, never. But the summary of verse 11 is this: make it your ambition to live a quiet life, that you're cultivating a habit of attending to your own private affairs, and that you're working with your hands, even, Paul says, as I gave you charge and commandment to do. So what Paul is simply saying to them is listen, we want to be concerned about others, but don't live in such a way as to where you're dependent upon them to get you through. But you're to work, you're to have an ambition to rest in the Lord and to stay focused on your area so that others don't have to take up the slack because you're not doing it, but you focus on working. You focus on having your rest in Jesus, and you work diligently. Why? So that we can be a help to others. Number 3, brotherly love. And like I said, we'll look at that again tonight because it'll have a special application for us. Brotherly love, number 3, manifested to be an example and testimony to those without. And this is where I'll stop with this and I won't give you number 4. But brotherly love manifest, and this is what Paul is saying, it will be an example and testimony to those without. Notice in verse 12, that ye may walk honestly, transparent, open toward them that are without, meaning those who are not saved, those who don't know the Lord, and that ye may have lack of nothing. See, Paul's informing them that they must be aware that there are people on the outside who are looking at what is happening on the inside. It's the life of the church. Maybe this would help in illustrating. Babe Ruth had hit 714 home runs during his baseball career, and he's playing one of his last full major league games, and it was the playing against the Cincinnati Reds, and Babe Ruth was no longer as agile as he once was, and he fumbled the ball, he threw badly, he in one inning alone had several errors that were responsible for the 5 runs of the Cincinnati Reds. As Babe Ruth walked off the field after the 3rd out and was heading towards the dugout, there was just a crescendo of yelling and booing that reached his ears. But just then a young boy jumped over the railing onto the playing field. With tears coming down his face, he threw his arms around the legs of his hero. Babe Ruth didn't hesitate for 1 second. He picked up the boy, he hugged him, he set him down on his feet, he patted his head gently. The noise from the stands of booing came to an abrupt halt. And suddenly there was no more booing. In fact, a hush fell over the entire park. Because in those brief moments, the fans saw 2 heroes. Babe Ruth, who in spite of a horrible day, dismal day on the field, he still could care about a little boy. And then there's the small little boy who still cared about the feelings of another human being. And both of these acts melted the hearts of the crowd. Jesus tried to explain it to His disciples. Paul's trying to explain it to his disciples. That there are those outside the church who are looking among us, and they're looking to see a growing love for each other among the brethren. Those outside the church should see peace and unity displayed among the brethren. Those outside the church should see each believer as honest, hard-working people. Pulpit commentary said it this way: one glaring instance of misconduct in secular affairs does more to hinder the progress of true religion than volumes of sermons can do to advance it. Amen. Let me ask you this morning, in what ways are you actively seeking to love others more abundantly? Someone says, well, I teach a class. That doesn't suffice. The devil can teach. Judas Iscariot was a good teacher. Well, I sing in the choir. That's not it either. I sing specials. I'm involved in music. That's not it. In what ways are you actively seeking to love others more abundantly? You say, well, we're really close to my family. I think Jesus died for more than just your physical family. I still look at the handshaking. I still see people who never leave. Sometimes I want to get down on my knees and look underneath the pew there. See if any of you have ankle bracelets on. Maybe you're not allowed to leave your pew or something that I don't know anything about. You say, preacher, you're just harping on this. I'm going to tell you here's why. Because I have spoken to people almost on a weekly basis. And we come back to this because this is a measuring stick as to how we're walking with the Lord. And I'll say, you ought to get with so-and-so. I don't know who that is. Well, they've been here 20 years and they sit right there and they're here all the time. And you've been here how long? 10 years? And you don't know who they are? I go through this week after week after week. I'm not talking with people who only come Sunday school and no other service. I'm talking about people who come Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And I can have a conversation, so-and-so because we had this. No, I don't know who they are. What do you mean you don't know who they are? You're in the same building. You're breathing their same air right here. This is not a big building. No, it's this small group. You know what the problem is? We're not really walking with God. Amen. Are your beliefs and your behavior beyond reproach? It's still about others. Let's stand together.